if you stacked up quarters and said put all the spies in a stack of quarters, it would never stack up. It would fall over because we're all different in so many ways. But like, I've had Joe Pistone on the show, the actual Donnie Brasco guy, and Jack Barsky and Robin Dreek, and all of us in this space, we all get what each other does and have had to do some similar things. But
yes, Jack Barsky is a good friend of mine, even though he's my dad age, and we get along so fantastically. Yeah.
I love that dude. And so here's what I'm talking about. When I had him on the show, I was able to say to him, look, I know what it means to do an SDR, to write your comms, your secured comms that you then have to transmit, and then you have to receive, and then you have to decode. Oh my God, did you ever sleep? I mean, to do all of the things that you have to do, which you have to do to protect yourself, people don't understand how much work there is in our field.
Yeah, and that's not the fun part of it at all. No. It's kind of the slog is the commo bit.
Yeah.
The
writing of reports too is an art in and of itself. Who are you writing for? Who's actually going to read this thing? Mm-hmm. What's it going to look like in 5 years? And you can't worry about all these things, but you have to be aware, be very clear about what you're writing. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've absolutely seen one line pulled out of one of my reports and have it used out of context in almost the exact opposite way. And you're just like, nope, that's my sentence. I see you cut and pasted it, but no.
Oh no, that's terrible. Well, we used to say in the CIA, if you didn't write it, it never happened. So you could have the best meeting with your source, but if you are not an effective communicator and you can't write down exactly the intel that you got and all the source dynamics and how they are, it's useless to the community.
That is such a big point. When I talk about like on my side, of the tactical side, you got to prep for the mission, which means I also have to always be prepping my question sets for whoever I'm going to encounter, because I didn't run sources as much as I encountered people and gathered information day to day. And sometimes in my career, I have run sources, and that's a whole different pile of work. But by the time I did my prep and was constantly prepping for what could be out in front of me and did the mission and then came back and had to write, and then maybe write like, oh my gosh, I have these 5 things that I've all discovered. I think these go together. I need to capture this in the report and send that up. I have to write again. There are many times where you're just like, whew, yesterday was done. And you look at your watch and it's actually tomorrow. And you're like, oh man, I got to get ready for the next patrol in 4 hours.
Whew. Yeah, you could spend in the agency, we would spend days writing up reports from one source meeting. Days. Right. Yeah. Especially if they were a good source and they gave you a lot of stuff. They'd keep you busy for a while.
Yeah. Did you guys get a lot of taskings from higher? Like, okay, we've seen these things. Can you go out and find this one particular flavor of information that we're looking for?
We would often get that. Oh, in war zones, we'd often get that from the military. So they would say, hey, you guys, we're looking for a safe house in this particular area of Baghdad. Do you have any sources who could help us find that?
Yeah.
Like, it's there, we know it's around, but we don't know exactly. And so that was super helpful, because then we could say, okay, who's got access to that part of the city?
Yeah.
Who kind of position that might know this? And so that was my job, is to kind of figure out which sources, who would know what, where. So that was critical for us.
Did you ever get Iraqi Arabic down, or was that always like a little too country for your modern standard Arabic?
Oh boy, I'm not good outside of formal Arabic, so I always needed a translator. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's crazy how different it is, because I'll brush up on my Arabic. My Arabic is not anywhere near good, but I can say things. But I also know the word for watermelon. We've talked about this. The word for watermelon is different as you go from north to south in Iraq.
Oh, for sure. And from each country to the next. My husband is originally from Egypt, but the fact that he could learn how to speak Arabic in Saudi, Yemeni, North African dialects was not a small thing, even for a native speaker of the language. Yeah. So I was so impressed. It would take him several weeks in country for his ear to adjust. And then I would listen to him parroting it back. And he just must have a good, an amazing ear for language, because he could do it. But I don't think that's pretty normal. I don't think that's typical at all. So forget it for someone like me, white girl up
Likewise.
here. Like, but
Yeah.
Arabs are very gracious. So you make any attempt at the language and they're so grateful. They're like,
Yeah.
that was awful, but thank you so much for trying.
You made me old man laugh. Because I've heard the same thing, but like that's, and then sometimes they break into English and you're like, oh, yeah, you know how to speak
Thank
English.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do this in your language. Um, and just because the audience doesn't probably realize, just when you say Arabic, it is really probably 150 languages that are
Man.
distinct. And maybe your husband with native knowledge and a knack can go out and communicate. But if you were to go listen to, even within Afghanistan, there was country Arabic, and then there, or Pashto, and then there was city Pashto. And then there was a language that they spoke there that was their own specific regional dialect, which was a blend of things. And you couldn't know that until you got there.
Absolutely. There's one letter in the Arabic alphabet, qaf, which standardly pronounced ka, which we don't have in English, could
Right.
be in the Gulf Arab countries ga with like a G. But if you went to certain parts of Egypt, it's not even pronounced at all. So it's almost like a pause. And so it can sound very different depending on where you are.
This is what made naming conventions insane. First off, the names that they pick, there's like, I don't know, 27 names in Arabic that you name somebody. But yeah, like Gaddafi, we still can't decide. That guy's been dead for 10 years. We still can't decide how to like spell his name. You just have to kind of go with it, right? Because he's got that.
Yeah, exactly.
Or when you're like, I got to look up Muhammad Ali Muhammad in my database. And you're looking for this dude, and we were talking earlier how on YouTube,
ways.
huh?
It can be transliterated into English very differently. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many Muhammad Ali Muhammads are there? And then your search engine is like, oh, is it, and it's crazy when we have like, this is how we write Muhammad. Like, well, this guy spelled it different. I'm sorry. That's his name, and like, how is Muhammad different than all of the forms of Muhammad that are out there? And you're just like, I don't know what to do with all that.
Right. Yes. So if you don't know Arabic, like you could take the root like Muhammad, and that could be variations on that name would be Muhammad, Mahmoud, Ahmed. These are all variations of Muhammad, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's these things that you and Jack and Robin, we can all discuss because we understand like the challenges, like especially when someone says, why don't you just go in the database and pull up every report on Muhammad,
People think, you just plug it in and boom, the result, the perfect result pops up. But you get 5,000 results that you then have to comb through and figure out which one is your guy or not. God.
Yeah.
That's exhausting. Yeah.
I've been playing with the concept as I try to explain like how challenging it is. Because again, like it seems super sexy and cool. And it is. Like we get to do a lot of really amazing stuff. But when you realize like what the scope of the work is, like people say, like, yeah, you're trying to find a needle in a haystack. We don't even get that much clarity. It's like, hey, out there, answer questions like, who's going to blow somebody up? And you're like, what the fuck? I don't know a soul here. I'm supposed to go out and find out all the things that nobody even tells their best friend because it's a secret. And I'm supposed to find that out. Okay, I will. I'll get out there and do it. But like, they're just like, there is this field out there. And I don't even know if it's hay. It could be flax, could be snow, could be anything. And I've got to go out and try to find these needles. And it turns out there's 1,000 fucking needles. Like, what do you like? There's so many things you don't know that you don't know. I could just bring you a box full of needles and be like, here's a box full of needles. I'll be back. Yeah. And I could just bring, and this is what made me good is I'm like, doesn't have to be your needle. I just need to bring you things that are impacting your mission that you don't know about. And that's what made me good.
I think that's probably why the CIA was very good at being the strategic collector. And then you guys are really good at giving the tactical on the ground information that those of us sitting in our ivory towers didn't have access to, right? And so the types of intelligence collectors, when you put it all together, create a much better picture and complement each other's work.
Yeah, closing that gap between the ground truth and that strategic collection part. One of the things I've realized, this is sort of recently, as I reflect back on my time overseas, was because I got to go off the camp every day, basically, whenever I wanted to. I I broke the doctrine in that I didn't look for placement and access. I became the placement and access, which you're absolutely not supposed to do. But because I had the access to all these places, I could show up because I had the power of the army behind me. And it wasn't by design, but I would just realize, like, what placement and access have I walked into? And what trust have I created? And can I turn that trust into more placement and access so I can get into rooms or have meetings that no one else can have? And that's
Mhm.
a different approach to, and not doctrinal at all. But when you do it a lot, you get to realize where there's seams in the doctrine where you can change things.
Yeah, and you actually have to in order to do anything meaningful. I had to change a doctrine several times where I was running an SDR before a meeting, but if I actually got out of my car, I might have been kidnapped because I was in those places. So, I mean, you can't run, you can't do things like you were taught that is
Yeah.
the perfect way to execute them. You have to actually bring real life into the situation and say, okay, how do I now amend this so I don't get kidnapped? Because that's not good.
I don't want to get kidnapped.
Not
This
helpful.
is the surveillance detection route, right? So that's a process where you try to determine if you or someone you're working with has a tail, and that also involves a lot of work. I mean, first off, you have to pick a route. Someone's got to approve it. All these other things go into this. Again, this is hours and hours and hours of work, and then you get there to execute, and you're like, oh well, shit. I can't even park here. I did a lot of surveillance training in Washington D.C. because that's the place where you do it, and you're like, well, we can't even fucking park here today because today there's a cone. You're like,
Darn it.
you just make
Yeah.
it up on the fly.
Yeah. And then you have what's quite fascinating. So, I live near the Space Coast of Florida. So we have the giant space industry, and we have, let's just take, for example, Chinese intel officers who show up without running SDRs. They don't do anything. There are just so many of them that the Chinese government can throw at the problem. And they just walk onto bases and try to gain access to secret parts of facilities so they can take photos and videos and whatever. And so they don't, I'm like, wait a minute, where's your SDR? Like, these folks don't even care
Yeah,
because we are so clueless about what's going on around us. I mean, for instance, here, the Chinese are crawling up us everywhere, and we're kind of like out to lunch because if you haven't been trained in how to see that stuff, you're
yeah.
going to look right past it.
This is a great point because as you were telling me the Chinese thing, and I'm big on this, I agree with you. Anything that comes from China, a suspect, anyone who visits from China likely has a tasking or an implicit
Right.
tasking, implied whatever it is, right?
Yep.
And I know this, but as you're talking about this, I'm like, this smells like conspiracy theory. The Chinese aren't out to get us, but I know they have the biggest intel organization in the world, and they're constantly
This
collecting.
ginormous army of people. And again, that does sound like we're being extreme here, but
Right.
think about how large China is and think
Yeah.
about how cheap labor is in China. And then you can understand how they have tens and tens and tens of thousands just computer warriors.
Hmm.
There's folks trying to
Yeah.
break into our systems, which they're trying to do every single day. They're trying to
Constantly.
attack infrastructure. So I think the American people, thankfully, don't know what goes on every day and what the US government is trying to protect us from. But at the same time, we kind of have the luxury of not knowing and sitting back and getting on TikTok and giving the Chinese government all your information. Um,
Yeah.
because we're like, they don't know, they don't see what you and I have seen. They don't understand
Right.
how it works and how it very much is already a war. It's already a war. It's just
Yeah.
not a conventional war. It's not one that you can easily see unless you know what to look for.
Right. And you can tell it when you arrest these guys because they're like, oh, damn it. That that they know that they're doing something that they shouldn't be or we wouldn't want them to do. And there's that end of it. The other end, I'm always
That's really
fascinated.
stupid. Like, you caught me up in this tree taking photographs of the launch, but I'm really stupid. Suddenly I don't understand English and I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Right.
The thing
And
is,
meanwhile, they've got their University of Miami student badge, and you're like, you probably speak some English pretty well here. Um, I got some friends that work in DOE, and they won't even come on the show because their fight is too hot right now. They're like,
yeah,
we can't. Even if we can talk about it, we can't expose ourselves to ourselves that we're talking about it, because we'll isolate ourselves within our own department and community. Like, this is how crazy this is, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're always like looking at each other, like the fact that I say, hey, we're spies, right? It's a fact. Because if the Chinese caught us talking, or we were walking together in Iran going hiking, they'd be like, look, at, even if we were butchers and bakers and candlestick, they'd say you're spies. So I just start with,
Absolutely. 100% immediately. You'd be thrown into prison, and then they would figure it out over time whether they were right or
right,
not.
right. And if they were wrong, they'd be more right. They'd be like, oh no, we can't be wrong. So this
Yeah,
is true.
you're still a spy no matter what. Yeah.
Right, right. But the ability to even talk openly within our own community and to talk accurately, it's limited because we don't like to talk. And that's one of the reasons why I do these shows, because like there's a lot of interesting things that happen, but we are our own biggest problem, I think.
Yeah, no, it's true. And part of that is because I think as the United States is isolated physically, except for Canada and Mexico. So again, we see things differently because we have a different kind of world experience.
Mm,
So you're going to feel differently if you lived in Europe and you've been in the middle of the wars over all of these centuries. Again, you see things in a different way. You feel a little bit more vulnerable. I think in the United States, we feel a little bit maybe
yeah,
too like we can't conquer us. You know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And not every Chinese person is bad, of course, but you're like, yeah, but there's a lot. And then I'm always fascinated by the numbers. I don't know how many FBI counterterrorism agents there are in Florida, but it's not 1,000. You know, it's just not.
Well, you know,
And
and I actually like what you just said. You said they're
yeah,
not all bad, of course. Of course, not every Chinese is bad, but one thing that
right.
people don't understand is how you can be forcibly co-opted because your family lives in China. And
Oh
so they're
yeah.
gonna say when you go out, "Hey, we expect A, B, and C of you when you come back to the mainland."
Mm,
And so these people don't necessarily want to do this, but they're forced into it.
yeah.
Yeah, we
And
have,
get,
and we don't do that as the United States, so we just
right.
assume nobody else does it. That's not true.
And allowed to have an opportunity to come to University of Miami or wherever they're at, and just to know that that's there and that's the exchange for it. It's not that big of a deal. And a lot of the things are no big deal. Like, no, just you're going to go in the STEM field. Just go focus on these areas where your pre-classification on this hardware or software or wherever it's going to be.
Absolutely. They're absolutely sent to the universities. STEM is huge. And so what another thing I don't think people understand is that the Chinese don't prefer to like do the research on their own. They like to steal the blueprints. They like to steal the research and then use it. And why work it up from zero when you can go to the University of Miami or wherever,
Yeah,
enroll and grab that stuff and bring it back, like, and
yeah,
that's how they do it. And that's how they just built um an airplane that's like an F-22, eerily
what?
like an F-22, which is so shocking, right?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Came from
How
an
how did this happen? Yeah, yeah.
engineering.
And I'm going to go back to the numbers thing too, because I don't know. Like, if you look at like how many CIA, and we're not going to talk specifics because that's too close to classified. But if you talk about how many CIA agents are in a country, whether it's Jordan or Japan or wherever it is, it's a finite number of people who have all of the work they can handle. Remember, we were talking earlier about Jack Barsky, like, oh my God, I've got to do 20 hours of work every day just to cover my tracks. And then you have the Chinese that are like, just do this one thing, just focus on this one area. And it becomes this unsolvable problem.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. It's a very big issue. It's huge. And it's interesting, we keep talking about Jack Barsky. If your listeners are not familiar, he's a former KGB agent who was undercover in the United States, deep undercover for a very long period of time till he decided, like, actually, they're not the enemy. I like these people and I want to be one of them. So
Right.
he's a reformed KGB agent. And man, he will tell you. I mean, you want to hear about China and Russia? That man will tell you exactly what they're up to. He's like, wake up, America.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we need to wake up, or can we just continue to Jack Barsky flip people?
Oh man. No, we have to be very aware. We've got to
Okay.
wake up. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a political topic, but I don't want it to be, but one of the things going on right now, and right now for anybody who's not aware, there's hope that Donald Trump will be arrested today and have to do the perp walk, and people are excited about that. I don't care about that. But there's this belief that somehow other administrations have been free of these kind of intrigues. And the reality is, and I don't know if you know Robin Dreek, I keep bringing him up, but he's an FBI counterintelligence agent. And I'm like, as much as I don't want to be political, but don't tell me that other administrations haven't had things when Hillary Clinton had TSSCI on her server in her house.
Right.
And don't tell me like that's somehow justified. If it is, there's paperwork. I believe you can be a Secretary of State and say, here's what we're going to do. But if you don't do the work, it's felonies on top of felonies. And so when we don't have an FBI that can prosecute these things,
yeah,
when her husband goes on,
yeah,
again, just on the plane
of the law, right? And then a little guy who released information, then you're going to get, crucified. But if you're the right person,
right?
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ed Snowden's a bad guy, and Julian Assange is bad. If we can have TSSCI on a server in someone's garage, and that's not the only breach, but it's just the one that's like, and she said, I did it. I take full responsibility, and then nothing happened. And it's like, are we taking any of this seriously? Like, are we really worried about China? And again, we can pick Republican example. Donald Trump is a great one. He's done a bunch of dumb stuff. So does it even matter if we can't clean up our own house?
Yeah, no, we need to definitely take politics out. I always tell people when I comment on national security issues or things like we're talking about today, I do so as best I can from an apolitical perspective because we deserve better. And you and I like to tell people how we see it, not as a Democrat or as a Republican or an independent, but as we see it as intelligence officers. And so that's a huge part of my platform. I believe yours as well.
For sure.
You know, the well-being of this country relies on people like us saying, this is not going well. We need to get our house in order. What's happened is an unfair application of A, B, and C, and it's not okay, right?
It's not okay. I'm always, go ahead.
Our country deserves better.
Yeah. I think about this. So this for everybody who doesn't know this stuff already. Every time you have an office, you have a person in charge of security for their office, right? And these people are the redoubt. Like, you cannot bring your phone in here because it's a classified facility. They check your phone in. There's a whole process. You have to sign all these papers and internet books and all of these things. This person's called the SSO or some other acronym that involves security and officer. And these people, it's their job to be by the book. You want a very hard by the book person. I want to know who the SSOs were in like all of these cases where there's, like, you and I know, like, you can't just have secret information in your Corvette. You can't just have it locked up in your house. You can't. Now, you can be president and say, yeah, all of that's unclassified. You can absolutely do that. But someone has to write down a note. This is all unclassified. Someone has to do the work. Why aren't those people going to jail?
I know. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And so when I look at a real threat, like, foreign intelligence collecting on us, I think, what does it even matter? Like, will we even believe it? You could have a breaking story right now. We just arrested a ring of Chinese spies. How about Chinese spies infiltrating Congress? Oh my God, not even a story. No one cares.
It doesn't seem to be an issue, which I'm like, I don't get it. This is.
Yeah. Okay, let's stop talking about things in our country. I want to talk to you. We sit across from people all the time, and we're trying to parse. One of the things I try to talk about with people, especially if they're younger and I'm trying to mentor, is who's running who, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah. Because everybody wants something. They're talking to you for a reason, and it might be out of the goodness of their heart, but you cannot start there. You've got to figure out what's going on.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Who's running who? Like, if you're not actively in charge of that communication and you're not directing it, they're directing it. I've seen so many officers walk into a room and the source runs the meeting, and I cannot even believe that it's happening. And I've watched it too many times. And I realize, because honestly, if you're not in charge, they're in charge, which we've forgotten. We've forgotten how to manage things. We're not very good at it. Let's just say that.
Yeah. with that said, though, there is some loss of control that you have to allow in my approach to it is I want to have very little control. I don't even want you to, like, you could watch me externally and you wouldn't know that I'm clocking everything that's going on. And if I need control, I'm going to nudge that conversation towards where I want it to go. But a lot of times I leave my hands off and I ask questions that don't look like this is hocus pocus here, but it doesn't look like I'm in control, but I'm absolutely letting the conversation go where it needs to go to, because I know that through my experience that wherever this person's going to go, I'm going to find what I need, because there's 1,000 things I need. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're going to go here. So there is control with that, but I'm not being run. I'm absolutely in charge of the conversation. And you can when you read someone's report, you're like, oh, you weren't in charge of this conversation at all. And so there's a difference between control and
point. Because, what I saw repeatedly is that we had a lot of sources lying to us. And the reason why we didn't figure that out is because the officer got into the routine of walking in the room, collecting the info, and leaving, and not asking any hard questions or strategic questions so that you could vet what that person telling you. And so that meant that person's like, okay, I'm lying. So how do I keep them from knowing that I'm making this all up? Well, I just walk confidently into every meeting and I just confidently deliver the intelligence. And then this officer is working so hard to take notes. And then next thing you know, meeting's finished and you've got to go. And that officer's never asked one good strategic question to hold. Okay, if you are the emir of a group or you're a member of a terror group, there are certain things that I'm going to ask you that are going to be very easy for you to answer. And if you never answer those questions, or if we never ask them, but if we ask them and you don't answer them, enormous red flag, and you're probably spotted a liar.
Right. That's such a great point. The questions that you have to ask, the development of that information, and then just finding a way to link it to something else, some other cross-vetting, so whatever it's going to be, you have to have that. And I don't want to be hard on people who come in and do that, because our job is hard. It's hard to know when you're really great at it. It's easy to believe that you're great at it before you're even good at it. And we're all overtasked. So you're like,
so overtasked.
And you think this is crazy. Like, you're a baker and I'm going to make this cake, but I'm going to do it real fast and throw it in the oven so I can go do accounting. Like, no. This is the whole reason why you're here, is to talk to this one person and get it right. So don't take 10 hours to do it, but be hyper efficient and be good at it. And let me help you be good at it. But we don't do that.
So there's I have a great example of this because I was so overtaxed, and not all of us were completely overworked. We didn't have enough time to sleep. It was such a difficult job and life in the war zone, especially Baghdad. So this source kept telling us about the location of these giant missiles in this orchard agricultural area. And for months, just kept putting out the same kind of reports over and over again about the missiles in the orchards. And then after months of this, I thought, do they ever find these stupid missiles?
Yeah.
And I stopped and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to ask them. So I finally got in touch with the military who had responsibility over the area. And I said, are you guys just like finding these missiles left and right? Because missiles are giant. You can't have a missile. They're huge. Can't put them on a little pile of leaves. They're so big. Right. And the guy's like, we never find anything. Nothing. Zero, zilch. So then I realized this guy has got us running. And nobody, including myself, ever stopped and said, why don't you identify to me the people who are hiding the missiles? Why would we just keep telling me where the missiles are instead of telling me who the people are? So we stopped this nonsense. So I wasn't asking strategic questions to vet the info. I was just running behind my source, running behind him. And then when we finally realized there were never any missiles, and this guy or someone in his network were completely lying.
Yeah. Who's running who? Yeah. We have the ability to see a liar, and there's sometimes body language it'll be, but how do you do that? Like, what do you do? What's part of your hints that something isn't right?
Okay, so I created an entire training program on this fun topic because it is so much fun. And I dealt with so many liars. And so I had to get really good at spotting them. So, a couple of the really quick ways is if someone is a big talker, they throw
Mm,
out lots of big fancy words to impress you.
okay.
Um, so let's just take this into the non like foreign affairs, like the dating world. You know,
Okay.
I'm a financier, and he throws out this gentleman all this information about his big career and whatever, all the big words to impress you, right? Um,
Hmm.
so the first thing is if I see someone trying too hard to impress, that's a red flag. Doesn't mean they're a liar, just says, ooh, there's just too
Pay
many
attention.
big words here.
Right.
Yeah. The other one is a fast talker. They're like the swashbuckling, you know,
Hmm.
they keep going and going and going so fast that you don't have a moment to dig into what they're saying. So
Yeah.
fast talkers keep your brain moving so fast that you can't evaluate them or their information.
Mm.
And so when I see those two things and they're usually very narcissistic type people, I'm
Right.
like, "Oh, we've got a live one here." And then I know I need
Yeah.
to dig down into what they're
What's digging? What's digging down? Tell me more about that.
asking very specific questions. It means not letting them control the conversation. So let's just say, okay, so in my book, there was a, it's so great. I still can't believe that we had this experience in Dubai where this gentleman wanted our friends to invest like $100 million in his fund. And so they sat me next to the guy at the bar and at dinner and said, work this guy over and see if he says he is who he says he is. Is he legit? Is his fund legit? So of course he was a total narcissist, fast talker, big talker. He had so much swagger. He walked in that room like he owned it. I mean, this guy was so full of himself, but when I dug, i.e., I asked a few questions like, okay, so you have this big fund. What are you guys investing in? And he's like,
Mhm.
oh, uh, emerging markets. It's another big term,
Yeah.
right? Emerging markets. And I was like, ooh, emerging markets. So tell me more about that. What kind of emerging markets? The guy already ran out of material, Pete.
Yeah.
Already. We didn't
One
even
minute, one question.
we're not even digging.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
like China. And I was like, okay, well, like where in China? China's a big place, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where? He goes, oh, well, if people want to know details like that, that's why I bring the bankers.
Yeah.
Okay. So I asked a few detailed questions about
Hmm.
your information, and you can't hang with me, not even for a second. So it's so funny. You're trying to get people to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in your fund, and you can't spend 5 minutes talking about said fund.
Yeah.
Hmm. So it turns out this guy, oh my gosh, I had the best time at this dinner. I just like picked apart everything he was saying without him realizing it.
Right.
And and then he was sweating, he was perspiring, like I had that guy in the hot seat. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And then to get me to stop, you're gonna love this. I don't remember we talked about this last time.
Mm.
Get me to back off. He finally leaned in really close and he's like, well, I can't tell you everything. And the reason why is, and then he like looked left and right, like swear it was out of the
Uh-huh.
movie. He's like, I work for Langley. I was like, you did not just do that.
Yeah.
So he's telling he has no idea that I'm a former intelligence officer for the
Right.
CIA. He has no
Yeah.
idea. And he
Yeah.
just told me that he's one. And I was like, oh, now this is really getting good.
Right.
So if a liar wants to make you back off, they have to find some way to like, don't go
Yep.
there and answer
Yeah.
questions.
I love it. Is there other so the fast talker, the braggadocio guy, combined, those things are bad. And I guess let me back out on this and just say, we're not omniscient. And so there's things that we see, we make mistakes, body language, or sometimes like I have a knack for seeing couples. Like if I see them and I know them, I'm like, oh boy, they're going through some troubles. And I couldn't tell you why, but it's just it's a slurry of clues. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to check in on them offline because something's not right over there, And I've been wrong about this, but usually not with the divorce thing.
Yeah. Now you can pick up a lot in somebody's body language. And I think the way that I was trained was you have to understand what they look like. What's their baseline?
Yeah.
What do they look like when they're normal and they're not stressed? And so then you will see when there's a departure from their normal. So if you start talking about a topic, say that they're lying about or they feel deeply uncomfortable about with, you will see a departure in their body language. So, for instance, I'm a Floridian, so I get cold very easily. So I actually cross my arms a lot. That's not a sign that I'm lying to you. It's a sign that I'm cold all the time.
Mhm.
But if you're having a conversation with me and then suddenly you talk about a top something you think I might be lying about, and I suddenly uncross my arms and change my stance,
Yeah.
again, it doesn't mean I'm lying. It says you need to really dig in here because something about that question makes her deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're establishing baseline and then you're looking for deviations from that baseline.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I often sit with my arms closed too, probably because I'm an old fat guy now, but that's the comfortable position for me. I am. This is the mind of a spy. I am aware that I'm doing that,
Yes,
and
me too.
and I'm like, oh, I should probably uncross my arms if I say something that I really mean, just in case there's like an implied thing that I just want to communicate clearly. But yeah, I mean, I'm like, people don't understand that not only are we looking, we're also putting our information into the conversation. You can't see my hands moving and everything, but
Yeah.
there's there's things that we do. So here's my big example. So we had this governor that we were working with in Afghanistan. We were trying to get our hands on wrapped around like who he was. And if you read the intel file on him, it's like, oh, which is the only file. There's not like a good guy file. They're like, oh, he's tied to the Taliban. Motherfucker, Mullah Omar lives this is true. He lived 3 miles from our camp where we were at. So this is Taliban country. Everybody knows someone in the Taliban. A lot of people were in the Taliban. That doesn't mean really much of anything. That's just like saying people have been to McDonald's. It's just like it's nothing. So we were trying to get a read on him, and so that was part of my job. And my whole job was just like he had a whole bunch of meetings. I just sat in with him on meetings. My interpreter would kind of just talk in my ear, and I'm just like getting that ground level. And some of the things I realized was like he genuinely loved talking about religion. And how did I know that? Because his hands would go above his heart, and he would pick his feet up off the ground as he talked. And when he talked to the Americans, he'd get blown back, right? They would
coil. Yeah.
Yeah. He would like be like this, like okay, as they directed things at him. But when he talked to the farmers, he got on the ground, crossed his legs, and talked to them like a leader. And I'm like, so there's all these different modes this guy goes in. So not only did I get I got 3 baselines, and I said, stop meeting with this, and do what you want to do as your commander, but stop meeting with this guy in standard Western chairs. Get on the floor and listen, and don't tell him what you're going to do or what he's going to do. And it completely changed our dynamic with this guy because of body language.
Brilliant. That is such a great example. I love that. And you are an astute watcher and listener, which
thank you.
Often not very good at that. And we have to kind of stop ourselves and say, okay, need to pay attention right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we deal with people, a lot of times, if they're legitimate, they are very, very scared, and they're scared for their own well-being, but mostly their family's well-being. And this was one of my tells was I would ask about their family, and how they responded to that kind of gave me a sense. And again, this is a sense, right? It's not like, haha, sometimes it is, but I tried to avoid haha moments because I tended to be not confident in my ability to get those right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you talk about family, of course, that's a very complicated topic because it may not even be okay in that culture to discuss the family if you haven't met them and don't know them. Right.
Right.
So it's really fraught with a lot of difficulties. And I don't know if you experience this a lot, but another telltale sign for me that someone may be lying to me is if I try very hard to ask good follow-up questions to dig, and they avoid it by deflecting. They avoid trying to answer the question by going over here.
Yeah.
And they're hoping that you forget that you were asking a question or that you lose your train of thought. And that's a way that for them to manipulate the conversation and dominate it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
deflection is a thing that we're not very used to as Americans, but if you start opening, again, listening as well as you are listening
Mhm.
to that, to the Taliban leader,
Yeah.
you're going to start noticing that that manipulation tactic of deflection.
Yeah, it's great. It's a skill I use in hosting, and I'll say that is fantastic. Now let's go back to this
Yeah.
question I asked you earlier, right? And then we just go right back to it, and then you get more information because now you baselined, and you're
Yep.
like, so you had said this, and even if I like to, if I'm going to be crafty, I'll get that thing that they said a little bit wrong,
Ooh,
and see
that's
if
actually a very high level technique. That's
right,
actually, yeah, that's like the advanced class.
right, but only just so,
Yeah.
so that they can, because I want them to be unknowing in their correction. Oh, no, no, no. What I meant was this. And now they're clarifying. And that's a higher level of, for me, a higher level of truth. Now, they could still be lying to my face, but I've got them. So I'll have another story. That same dude was talking about I asked him his plan for the district in Afghanistan we were in. And so he gave it to me and we wrote it all down and I checked it with him. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this into a language the Army can understand, PowerPoint. And I'm going to bring it back to you tomorrow. We're going to go over it. And so I went in and I got it all in right. I saved it. And then I took a new document, same thing, and then I jumbled it all around. And I handed him the jumbled one. And he's like, you dummy. And I'm like, oh, great. This is working. And then he fixed it right back to what he gave us before.
And I'd say good info, really good info.
Right. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
when you lied and you're not paying too much attention, you're not going to very well easily remember your lie.
Right.
I had a
Exactly.
dude who's like, I just got back from a trip to Iran and they taught us how to be better terrorists in Iran. So I was like, tell me about like, it was no small thing to move from Iraq as a Sunni to Iran. I'm like, this is very strange.
Right.
And so he told me this very convoluted story about how he got from point A to point B to this terror training camp in Iran.
Yeah.
Um, and I let him go through, and then I like digged in and got all these details. And then I went back to it later on in the conversation and asked him, so on day 3 or at this point, and I dig in. And once I got him out of his timeline, he was completely lost. He didn't remember what he said.
Mm-hmm.
Such a giant fabrication that when I revisited an issue or I purposely got it wrong, he couldn't correct me. He couldn't remember. He got all
Yeah.
confused. He was flustered. He turned red. Like, so someone who's full out lying to you, it's actually quite easy to catch them in that lie. If you use
Yeah.
the timeline, you jump back, or if you do what you did, which is um, a presumed false
Yeah.
statement. Yeah.
Right. The other thing I like to do, and I'm sure you're familiar with this technique, but is to just like whatever that thing is, illustrate that picture in your head with your questions.
Yes.
So
Oh, yes, I love that.
yeah, like what do I not know? And I think about what am I writing down notes. I might even ask my interpreter, what else do we need to know? What else do ask him who the lady was? Yeah, who was the lady? And then he would, ask who the lady was, and he would say, "Oh, it was my spouse. Yeah, she was there. I forgot to mention that." And actually, what that does is it helps when everything's going right, and if we are in charge of the meeting and the meeting is flourishing, they'll say, "And I forgot something to tell you about that," and then they'll give you another nugget, and you're like, "Oh yeah," because they kind of, if they're telling the story and it's real for them, they're trying to give you detail, and it's kind of start ziggy zaggy, and then they kind of lock in, and then they go forward. So you want to back them out and test that truth by asking them these illustration questions.
So what I like about that is you're pointing out something I call texture. When you're a
Mm,
truth teller, there's texture to your story. You can provide a certain level of detail. When you're creating a story, kind of on the fly or even slightly prepared, you're just not going to provide the kind of texture the truth teller provides.
yeah, yeah,
And so, when you see someone explaining how they felt and what was happening and how that's interesting because that tends to show me I think they're telling me the truth when
yeah.
they start going into what they happened and how it made them feel reflecting on their own. So I'm always looking for texture. When it's lacking, I'm like, ooh,
Hmm.
not very deep. That
Yeah,
story is very up here and not down there.
yeah. Yeah. Oh boy, there's so much in it. It's actually two things. I want to come back to the emotion part, but I want to get into like baseline truth. And I illustrate this by thinking about you're on a boat and you're kind of skipping along. They're not lying to you, but you're just kind of going across this ocean and there's a lot of shit to dig into. And then they'll say something and I'll go, wait, right here. And I'll drop anchor and I'll jump in and I'll dive or I'll mine down. And then if there's nothing there, I just climb back up and I look at it. But I'm looking for a place. I would say I'm listening for things, not to the person. I hear everything the person is saying, writing down notes, but I'm listening for the things that I say that is worth. And this is not something this is an advanced skill to go, that right there, let's dive in. And then I'll stop, because I'm in control of the conversation. Oh, hold on a second. Let me ask you about this. And then you dive down and then you explore that whole area that you're in that you think you discovered. And once you're good at it, there's always gold there because you've got a nose for where the gold is.
Yeah, that is a very kind of expert level skill where you can kind of hover over it and identify the areas that you think you can get some good stuff in there. Yeah. It takes experience to do that, right?
Yeah. And they're not lying. They're just, not telling you the whole truth.
I mean, they're doing their best, but they don't always know what it is we're looking for. They don't know what intelligence is all the time.
That's true too. Boy.
For us, we could say, oh my gosh, that's the most interesting thing ever. And they're like, really?
Yeah.
And you're like, yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so true. Because the mundane things to them are mind-blowing to us. When you hear these stories about what it's like to live outside in Iraq and like in the villages, like when you go to 7-Eleven and there's a dead dude and there's been a dead dude there for 3 days, you're like, why doesn't someone pick him up? Like, hey, dummy, this is a message. This guy is killed. Everybody needs to pay attention. Don't touch him. He's there as a warning to all of us. And so we just leave him alone. You're like, oh shit, never occurred. Someone told me this. Never occurred to me that you had to just leave that dead dude there. Because there's no police. There's none of that stuff. This is what happens to people who, whatever the message was.
Right. Oh, there were a lot of messages in places like Iraq, under Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah. This brings, I'm going to come back to my emotion thing in a second, but I want to ask you about this because we often talk about if you talk about Iraq, and next time someone from our area, someone who's been there or studied about it, will talk about the bombing at Samarra at the mosque. And they'll act like that is some kind of, this is the point where things change. And here's what I know about analysts. They usually get things wrong. And they love to have dates and times and events line up perfectly. And sometimes they do. Yeah. But I also know that when something blows up in Iraq, it's probably politics, not religion,
It's or a combination.
Sure. Yeah.
Or a combination. Yeah. For sure. Like the sectarian issue was a very, very important issue. But you can never take politics out of anything, really, especially in those parts of the world, right? When your politics is all about total and complete control of a country. So politics are going to rule. That's why I think people don't understand. It wasn't just like a Sunni, Shia, Kurd, Christian. Oh, poor Christians were just over here dangling in the wind, being persecuted by everyone. But it wasn't just them against each other, but then within each group, there was splintering because they're all trying to get control over limited amounts of resources and control of areas. So then you had the Sunnis just splintering into all kinds of different insurgent groups. The same with the Shia, although a little bit more control over that on the Shia side. Same with the Kurds. For a while, they were strong, but then they've splintered, So yeah, it's all politics, right?
Yeah, it is. Once you wash the politics out, the multi-partyness of Iraq, you start to run out of things that are left that have that much impact. So sure, there might be, I don't like the Shia because I don't like but that's like black and white in America where there's this natural conflict you're never going to wash out. So is it because of, no, Ali wasn't an imam, it's like,
so people, Americans, we don't understand because our society is not like this. There are a lot of countries in the Middle East that are ruled by religious leaders. So you can't take religion and politics, you can't separate them, right?
Right.
That hurts our American sensibilities.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you say, wait a minute, is it one or the other? Well, really, it's all together because in Iran, we still have a religious regime. Politics and religion are together in the leadership. That's how the entire country is set up.
Yeah.
Very, very, well, it's very nuanced now, but for a while it was like that in Saudi Arabia and places in the Gulf. But the idea of taking religion out of the mix, the whole reason why there are Sunnis and Shias is they were fighting for control after the Prophet Muhammad died.
Right.
So it was all about political control because this state was supposed to be a religious one
Right.
from the beginning. That
Yeah.
was the whole intent.
And what you're saying is exactly right. Like there's a religious undertone to everything, but the Iraqis will tell you legitimately, and we're not religious, and so it's like,
Most of them are very secular. Yes.
yeah, it's crazy. Anyhow, I want to get back to emotions because I will say, if I can get the person I'm talking to in an emotional state that I'm desiring that they get into, maybe even it's mad, but I don't like to mess with anger because anger tends to not be very fruitful for me. But if I can get that, I'm going to beat any collector around me because I've now got them desperate to tell me the thing that I'm looking for, that I'm aiming for, right? And so I'm always looking for emotive states, and I don't try to play with their emotions because I'm trying to be as hands-free and leave no imprint as I can, and a positive thing because I've got to meet with this person again. But I'm always like pulling a lever to see, like, is there emotion there? Is there emotion there? Is there? And when it's boom, there it goes. That person's often running and talking. Again, I'm going to let that emotion be my ally and get me to where I need to be. Whether it's in culture, I find is a great emotional lever because they're so passionate. Like if I was to say, man, you know what? Florida's full of a bunch of dummies. A Florida man, ha ha ha. You're likely to come back and be like, hey, hold on a second.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Or if I say Florida is wonderful, they have the best beaches in the world, someone from Florida is going to be like, let me tell you my favorite beach. And I've got them now, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I use emotion.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Although, I think what you said is you have to be very careful. I'm sure you realize that.
Yeah.
If you get someone too emotional talking about politics, boy, you'll never get anything done in that meeting.
That's,
You're done.
yeah,
You
that's
have
true.
to constantly get that person back on track because the lovely thing about Arabs and Middle East people is that when they have an environment where they feel they can talk safely, they do
Right.
want to tell you how they feel. Like they want you to
Yeah.
understand. Yeah.
But there are all kinds of levers too. Like you don't have to talk about politics necessarily. I mean, for sure, if they get going, and it could be you get them going, we're talking about advanced level stuff. This isn't for beginners, but yeah, like soccer. You get Arabs talking about soccer. Watch out! You're going to be talking about soccer for a long time, and that might be the whole. For me, that might be the whole point of the whole meeting. I'm bonding with this person. They're going to dig that I dig what they're about, and the next time I come to them, I'm already a mile ahead of my peer who's like, all right, now we've established rapport. We're going to get into the collection phase. Like I'm going to dominate that person the entire time we're there because I spend time not just talking about business, because in the real world, that's what we don't do all the time. We don't always talk business.
Right. Although Americans, it's very hard for us and myself, like to cool my jets and to wait in order to talk about something personal before I get to business, especially in the Middle East. It's so hard for me. I'm like, let's just get down to business, man. We got stuff to do. We got intel to collect or whatever it is. The reason why I'm there. We're here to do business. And I really have to rein myself in because that's not what works in that culture.
Yeah.
If you don't feel as if you care about them, they're not going to do business with you.
Yeah.
They're just not.
It's so true. Like, oh, I've got a staff meeting at 3:00. I've got to get back for. Like, this is why I never worried about that. And my buddy John and I were talking the other day, and he tried to capture why people are good at this work. And again, there's a lot of different levels, right? So your level different than our level, but he said you have to have like a double dose of initiative. You have to be willing to go do this, even if it's dangerous, because we don't get to worry too much about danger. We don't want to be reckless, but you have to know where reckless is so you can get it right up next to it. And then there has to be a healthy disregard for the rules, because a lot of the things that we have to do And the opportunities we get, we're not in the gray zone anymore. Like, I absolutely should not be breaking this law, but I know I'm breaking it, but I know why, because this is the thing that I'm, and so I'm not saying that we always have to be in the black, but you have to be really comfortable with it being really charcoal around what you're doing and what you're saying. So
Well,
there's,
I would say we were collecting on different levels, so we were very, very strategic collectors in the
right.
agency. But the way we didn't talk about necessarily breaking laws or rules, but it was like you have to be very quick at responding to events on the ground or your environment because things are changing. You're like, again, it's the real world. Things are going to go wrong. And you've
Yeah.
got to be very quick at making a judgment call about how to move your operation forward in the midst of chaos, in the midst of something going wrong. And so you have to have people who can operate under enormous amounts of stress.
Yeah. And they're going to make mistakes. As a boss, you have to have a gigantic butt that can get chewed on for days, months even, to protect your person. Because if I don't believe that you've got my back, one, I'm never going to tell you what I'm really doing because I'm still going to do my job. And two, I'm not going to trust you to protect me. And you see it all the time where you get a boss that's like, isn't all in on your ability to go out and do this impossible work,
Oh
which
gosh,
makes
yes, me for
you know,
sure. Yeah, you're a girl, especially back then. You're a girl. I don't think you can do this. Yeah,
right, 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 right,
yeah,
right.
and I always tell people, like, to be fair, it is very, very difficult for a woman to do work in the Middle East. It is difficult, and the reason why I could do it was because I had spent so much time trying to understand the nuances of Arab culture. So, just because a woman doesn't mean that I am capable. It's because I have a lot of empathy. I have a lot of intuition and emotional intelligence. And is just as important as I learned the Middle East. I learned the people that I was the region that I was working. There's no
Yeah,
shortcut for being a subject matter expert. So the one part of the equation that folks in the CIA left out when I was in was the fact that as a woman, I could have had that knowledge and expertise and used it to overcome the deficiencies that I faced as being a female. You got to overcome it somehow. So the way
yeah.
that I met that challenge was by being smart and smarter than the next guy and very intelligent at what I do. And so you have to learn how to overcome your initial deficiencies or disadvantages.
Yeah, being aware of whatever your hurdles and obstacles are and working to get over those things is because being a woman, once you harness that, oh my God, like there are so many advantages that a dude can't have. Like, one, you can be invisible in a room. It's like you're an alien from another world. And so you sit in there and they see you sitting there and they're like, they don't know how to act around you. And so,
Unicorn. Yes.
yeah, and that's an
Yeah.
advantage if you know how to use it.
Correct.
Your
If you know
presence
how to
can be,
use it, if you
yeah,
do, it's a
yeah,
massive advantage. Yes.
yeah,
But you
yeah,
have
yeah.
to know how to work it. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I couldn't, necessarily walk into another different culture and do that. I knew how to do that in that culture because that's what I studied.
Mm,
That's where I traveled as a student. That's where I did mission work. That's where I did, study abroad programs. That was very critical. And so I think this is really important, Pete, to say what, for folks who might be watching this. And this isn't about intelligence, it's about life in general. It is, especially for the people who are in the process of trying to map out their life path as a younger person, say in their 20s or 30s, early 30s. You have to be willing to do things other people aren't willing to do in order to build up an expertise, because what you want to do is become the best that you can be at something. I don't care if it's brick making, brick laying, or being an intelligence officer. You want to be the best in your field. And so you've got to take those early 20s and early 30s and say, I'm willing to suffer for it. I'm willing to make hard choices, go to hard places, and do hard things so that I can benefit from that expertise later on. Suffer well and suffer early is
oh
what I
yeah.
say. Like,
Hmm. It's so true, especially in our field. One of the things, and I know we're coming up on an hour, but I just wanted to ask this and get your thoughts on it. Is it's very hard to know when you're good at being in the field, and almost nobody is like, oh, I stayed on the ground long enough that I got great, because it's just so rare. And I'm talking my kind of tactical collection outside the wire, because most everybody graduates up the scale and they don't go out anymore. And so you've got a finite number of missions. Maybe you've got 200 missions or whatever it is, right? Now imagine if you quadrupled that number and how good you would be. And if you were guided, oh my God, by somebody who actually knew how to do it. It's so rare to put those combination of things together in our work so that you can become truly great at it. And by the way, most of our judo is our own thing. Like it's not, we have similar things, but we don't get to work with each other often enough to go, oh, that's a great move, I'm going to use that, so we don't get to do those kinds of things. So it's very hard to develop. And so the best way, honestly, is to go put yourself in harm's way and go out and do the things that nobody else is going to do. Because I promise, as soon as someone said, oh, well, I don't do that, and I'm like, oh, I will. I'll go find that out right now. And that was my self-tasking. So what are your thoughts on like more on that expansion? Like, how
Always
do you,
humility. You cannot learn without humility. And humility is, and when you learn, it means you're always open and always realize that you've never made it. Like you've never figured everything out. It's constantly learning. I'm still learning. There's so much to learn. It's watch out for the person who's like, I'm an expert and I've got it all figured out. Like, okay, red flag. Humility is very important to becoming really good.
Do you want to ask me anything, or do you want to just call this the show right here?
Oh, no, this has just been so fabulous. It's always fun to talk to you, Pete, because we have very similar experiences, and we're just so hopeful that your listeners are taking away something that is beneficial to their lives in some way.
I love it. All right, stand by. I'll be right back to you.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated